So, let's get right to it. What is the best affordable way to make home recordings of acoustic instruments? You'll have to take my word for it that I've watched hundreds of hours of YouTube tests and reviews of recording equipment, and that I've done my own simultaneous recording tests with different mics and interfaces, and I've spent many more hours listening to them with the best headphones I can afford at the moment, including a pair of in-ear monitors that I bought for the purpose. But in watching all those mic tests and comparisons, I've come to suspect that your average human being, or at least this average human being, cannot hear the difference between any two devices of anything like similar quality in the short tracks most people post on YouTube. I found myself dragging the progress bar to the part where the reviewer gives his or her opinion and recommendation, so I'll spare you the comparison tracks and jump right to my conclusions. If you just want to make better than I could get with my phone recordings of your acoustic instruments, I'm recording Native American Style Flutes, native drums and rattles, pentatonic lyres and plucked psalteries, and my bodhrans. But this applies to almost any acoustic instrument, from guitar to ukulele to, I suppose, piano. Then USB plug-and-play condenser mics are by far the easiest solution. There are hundreds of them on the market, from $40 to $180, from makers who concentrate on budget audio to a few of the big names in recording mics and studio equipment. With enough care, you can get a good recording of acoustic instruments with even the most inexpensive of USB mics, and mics in the $100 to $180 range, like the AKG Lyra Pro and the PreSonus Revelator, which I've personally tested, and many others, from Fifine and Manano at the budget end, to mics from the big names like the Blue Yeti, and the Hypercast, or the hybrid mics like the Audio-Technica AT 2020 USB Plus, or the new Rode NT USB Plus, which I know only by reputation. We'll certainly make recordings of your acoustic instruments which are, honestly, pretty darn good. But let's be honest. USB mics are essentially computer peripherals, and most of them look like, and maybe even sound like, well, computer peripherals. And they were really all pretty much designed for a totally different application than recording music. They were designed for podcasting, live streaming, and gaming. And yet, while I don't watch gaming videos and don't do many live streams, I have yet to see a podcaster on YouTube actually using a USB mic. They do work for recording vocals and instruments, even acoustic instruments, but that's not their purpose. And the most expensive are loaded with features that the amateur musician just does not need, from multiple recording patterns for interviews to built-in effects at the high end. Still, for ease of use, they are definitely the way to go. Just plug one into your phone, tablet, or laptop, open any recording app, and set the gain on the mic, and you're good to go. If you're just after better than my phone recordings of your instruments, a USB plug-and-play mic at around $100 to $180 will certainly do the job. I have owned and used the AKG Lyra Pro, at one time considered the best of the best in the USB mics, and I recently tested the PreSonus Revelator, one of the new breed with built-in effects. Both produce excellent recordings of my flutes, drums, and rattles, and do a decent job on my lyres and psalteries. Turns out, however, that it is actually possible to put together a more traditional and perhaps more professional, at least more professional looking, XLR condenser mic and interface package at the same price as the $100 USB mics. In the XLR world, you have to purchase two components, a mic and a digital interface. The mic plugs into the interface, and the interface plugs in, using again a standard USB cable, to your laptop, phone, or tablet. About the only difference is that the gain controls that were on the USB mic are now on the interface. Now, most USB mics, even under the $100 price point, feature what we might call high-resolution capture, 24 bits at up to 196 kilohertz. That just means that they should be able to capture the full range of subtle detail in the music. So if you want to equal their sound potential, you will not be looking at the least expensive audio interfaces on the market, most of which are limited to CD quality, For those of you who do not remember or are just too young, CDs were the original way of distributing digital recordings of music. Plastic disc you put into a machine connected to your home stereo, way before streaming services and even before the iPhone. They were recorded at 16 bits at up to 44.1 kilohertz. Still, you can get a high-resolution USB interface that plugs right into your laptop, phone, or tablet, just like a USB mic does, for about $70. There's one from CAD Audio, the CAD Connect 2, and of course, the infamous Behringer UMC 202 HD. Okay, it's not the interface that's infamous, but Behringer itself, but perhaps more on that later. The PreSonus AudioBox Go interface is only $10 more, and as of this post, the anniversary edition of the PreSonus AudioBox USB 96 is on sale for the same price, though both of these have only one XLR mic input. You'll find a few other interfaces on Amazon at this same price point, but they are from unknown brands, and who knows how they perform. They might be bargains, and they might not be. As for a mic, the Behringer C1, which is often rated the best mic under $50 for vocals, is currently selling for $30 on Amazon. How could you go wrong? You'll need an XLR cable to connect the mic to the interface, and that'll set you back another $8. So for $108, you can buy a complete high-resolution XLR setup for recording your acoustic instruments. Even less if you're willing to settle for only CD quality, and many of us settled for that for years. Put the C1 with the Behringer UM2 interface, which goes for $40, or the M Audio M-Track Solo, which is $10 more, and you can have an XLR setup for $70 or $80. But why would you want to? There are advantages to the XLR route. Probably the most important is that with a USB mic, you get what you paid for, and that's it. If you want to upgrade, you have to replace the whole unit. And honestly, once you've spent your $180, there is nothing in the USB mics to upgrade to. With an XLR setup, if you go for a high-resolution interface, you can upgrade the mic when you outgrow your first one. You can even try a dynamic mic to see if that suits you or your instruments or your music better. And if you went for the Behringer or the CAD Audio interfaces, both of which have two mic inputs, you can easily move to multiple mic recordings, should you want to record a vocal and an instrument at the same time, or do a stereo recording of your acoustic guitar. Then, too, there's the fact that USB mics still look like computer peripherals, and XLR mics and interfaces look like actual recording equipment. That should not make any difference at all, but for most of us, I suspect it does. Plugging your XLR mic into the interface is somehow much more serious and professional than just plugging your USB mic into your phone, and that might, given human nature, be reflected in the music you record. But then, even if the cost is about the same, is it worth the extra effort? I did extensive simultaneous recordings with the AKG Lyra Pro and PreSonus Revelator USB mics and the Behringer UMC 202 HD and CAD Connect 2 interfaces paired with the Behringer C1 mic, and I can testify that, with my 75-year-old ears at least, except occasionally for the boosted bass response on the PreSonus Revelator, the XLR mic and interface sounded just as good and maybe a tiny bit better than the USB mics. One thing to be aware of is that at this entry level, XLR mics do not have the multi-pattern features, well, except for the Behringer C3, that the $100 and up USB mics feature. If multi-pattern recording is important to you, for multiple instruments played at the same time, or for interviews, USB might still be the way to go. Or you could try the C3, or you could get a second mic for your XLR setups. So back to mics again. If one of the advantages of an XLR setup is the upgrade path, and if even a $30 mic can equal the quality of most USB mics, what can you expect from a slightly more expensive XLR mic? Is it worth the upgrade and the higher cost? Here's the problem. The Behringer C1 mic is pretty darn good. So good that I had trouble finding a mic for under $100 or even $150 that sounded significantly better than the C1. I tried the Neat Worker B2, a $100 mic currently on sale for $70, and the Audio-Technica AT2020, often rated the best mic for vocals under $100, and included in test of much more expensive mics. I got mine used like new for $65, and since more AT2020s have been sold than almost any other mic, you can certainly find them for that price if you look around. I tried the $150 AT2035, which has an even larger diaphragm than the AT2020, and which I found, again, used like new for $90. None of them sounded noticeably better, at least in my totally unacoustically treated bedroom studio, on actual recordings than the Behringer C1, not even the AT2035. And I actually preferred the sound of the $30 C1 over the $100 AT2020. Something about the response of the AT2020 made it sound recessed or repressed compared to the C1. And how about those dynamic mics? Dynamic mics use a whole different physics to record sound and don't require any current from the interface to work, though they do still require an interface. They are generally used on stage as handheld mics for vocals and to mic loud instruments like drums and guitar amps. However, the single most famous and most popular podcast and live streaming mic, the Shure SM7B, is also a dynamic mic. I tried the $21 Behringer XM8500, often mentioned as the best bargain in recording mics. The $25 GLS ES57, often considered the best of the Shure SM57 clones, and the Shure SM57 itself, a $100 mic and the workhorse instrument mic of many professional recording studios. The Behringer works fine for voice, but I would not use it on instruments. It is a bit vague on the details. The Shure is excellent, but I actually preferred the sound of the GLS ES57 on my flutes, drums, rattles, and psalteries. Compared to the condenser mics, the dynamics I have tried are more restrained, have a bit less detail, and are smoother overall. They certainly pick up a lot less room noise. I have to say, if I were doing my first podcast and solo podcasting was my whole ambition, I would seriously consider the Behringer UM2 interface and the XM85 mic over any of the USB condenser mics. That would be about $60. Just put a big foam pop filter on the mic, and you might even, with the right camera angle, be able to pass it off for a Shure SM7B. So, you might be asking by now, did I ever find an affordable mic that sounds better than the Behringer C1? There's a story here. I began to look at used mics in the $200 to $250 price range, according to some, the bottom of the sweet spot in condenser mic value for money. These mics can sometimes be found used for around $120. The SE X1S, the Lewitt 220 Pure, the Rode NT1A, the AKG P220 or even P420. I seriously considered the neat King B2, which on sale right now for $119, has to be one of the best bargains in high-quality large diaphragm condenser mics ever. But I decided it was just too big and heavy for my home recording setup. Anyway, while researching the SE X1S, I found a video of a blind comparison of many of the mics I was interested in on the Audio Hotline podcast, I'll link that below, which, unlike most comparison videos, featured phrase after phrase for comparison. After listening to it many, many times, I was able to pick out 3 mics that I liked the sound of better than the rest, a lot better actually. Again, they sounded better to my ear, they might not to yours. I was surprised to find that one of them, once I watched the reveal, was the AT2020. It was my third choice, but it was in the running. The C1 was not part of the test, as they were all more expensive mics. The other two were the Rode NT1A. No surprise there. Many people consider it the best of the affordable XLR condenser mics, affordable at about $229 in a studio kit with a shock mount. And the other was the relatively new Behringer TM1 large diaphragm condenser mic. Behringer takes a lot of grief and gets left out of a lot of reviews entirely, at least in part because they seem to make a lot of imitations, complete with similar names, of popular products and sell them at lower prices than the originals. The TM1, some might argue, is just an imitation Rode NT1A. The assumption is that Behringer must cut corners somewhere to get the price down, and takes unfair advantage by riding on the coattails of more popular products. And there is a feeling, at least in the review community, and at least among some, that making and selling copies might be morally wrong. I have to say, though, that you might look at the Rode NT1A and think that it is just an imitation of the Neumann U87AI. They look alike, they even sound something like, but the Rode is way cheaper than the Neumann, not by a factor of 2, which is the difference between a TM1 and an NT1A, but by a factor of 15. In fact, almost all large diaphragm condenser mics could be said to be imitations of one or another of the Neumann mics, at least to aspire to imitation. So if Behringer consistently makes products that perform well, maybe not great, but always well, at affordable prices, then dismissing them outright is just a kind of audio snobbery that does not serve the audio customer well. End of rant. Thank you for listening. And no one denies that Behringer does produce products that perform well, and often very well, often exceptionally well, at their price points. The UMC 202HD interface is a case in point. It offers superior low-noise preamps and equal build quality to interfaces costing over twice as much. Not my opinion, but the opinion of people who study such things seriously, like Julian Krauss. I'll link that below too. It and the CAD Audio Connect 2 have equivalent build quality, though annoyingly everything in the CAD case seems to be at the front, so that when you plug in XLR cables, if you're not careful with your routing, it tips the whole thing forward. Both have 2 combination mic line or instrument inputs. Both are USB powered, though the CAD has a USB-C to A connection, or even C to C if you have the right cable. And the Behringer has the older USB to A connection, though you can buy a B to C printer cable that works just fine. The CAD is only 24-bit at up to 96 kHz, which is certainly enough for any purpose, but the Behringer goes to 196 kHz. The biggest difference, though, is the gain control. Though they are rated for about the same gain, mics that require a setting of 10 o'clock on the Behringer to get to negative 12 dB in recording require a setting of 1 to 2 o'clock on the CAD, leaving a lot more headroom on the Behringer. And it does not seem to be a matter of how the knobs work either. My impression is that the Behringer really does have considerably more gain. The Behringer was my solid pick between these two interfaces. And to my ear, getting back to mics now, the $100 Behringer TM1 sounds almost as good as the Rode NT1A, just as good in some comparisons of processed vocals I've watched on YouTube. I will link that as well. But that is not the point, is it? Without any comparison, on its own merits, the TM1 is the right price and just sounds good to me. So I bought one. It's the only mic I've tried so far that sounds significantly, not day and night, but significantly better than the C1, or for instance the AKG Lyra Pro or the Presonus Revelator USB mics. It is smoother, fuller, richer, with greater detail through the whole frequency range, but mostly it's just more fun to listen to the recordings made with it. In direct comparison, it lacks the sharp and raw edges of other inexpensive mics, which can go totally unnoticed until you have something better to compare. The fullness, I think, is a matter of how the harmonics are recorded. I tuned pianos for years, and I know the ringing sound of a piano in tune with itself. All the harmonics from the lowest to highest, singing behind any note you play, and soaring up behind the chords. To me, the TM1 sounds like a piano in tune, or perhaps better, captures the sound of a singing piano. That harmonic fidelity might be what I missed in mics like the C1, good as it is, and especially in the AT2020. And once I heard the TM1, first in that YouTube comparison and then in my own simultaneous recording test, there is no going back. I hear it as well in reviews of the King B2 and of course in recordings of the Rode NT1A and a few of the more expensive mics. I do not hear it in the affordable SE mics or the Lewitt. I hear something like it in the AKGs, but not to the same extent. However, the King B2 is still just too big and heavy, and the others are more expensive, even used. There's just no reason not to buy the Behringer TM1 at $99. It comes with an excellent shock mount, an intelligently designed pop filter, a decent XLR cable, and, to my ear, it's just a great sounding mic for recording my acoustic instruments. So, in the end, I spent just about $230 on 3 mics and an interface. I'll keep the C1 as a backup, and in case I want to try stereo recordings of my psalteries. And I'm keeping the GLS ES57 for those times when I want that dynamic sound. Just as a note, before I wrap this up, in all this, the single greatest improvement to the sound of my recordings did not come from a mic or an interface. It came from investing in a professional level DAW that runs on my iPad Pro and my old Mac Air. A DAW is a digital audio workstation, the actual app you use for recording, and generally with the ability to record and mix multiple tracks. After trying a few, I settled on N-Track Studio, which features a relatively intuitive touch interface, easy editing of the waveform, an extensive library of effects, instruments, and loops, as well as an on-screen keyboard and drum set for when you want to add those things to your compositions. Totally worth the price of a subscription. And even better, I found the people at N-Track to be super responsive to issues and suggestions. Very highly recommended. So, was investing in an entry-level XLR setup worth the extra money and effort over the $100 USB solution? I can't tell you what the sound of your recordings is worth to you, but to me, I'm happy with the cost. I mean, it's not like I spent $4,000 on a Neumann U87AI and an Apollo or Zen interface. $250 is not all that much. I spent way more on flutes. And the pleasure I will take in recording and listening to and sharing recordings of my Native American Style flutes, native drums and rattles, my bodhran and plucked psalteries, is justification enough as far as I'm concerned. Better than my phone? Yep, I would say so.